Mason Foster bolted upright in bed, gasping for air that wouldn't come. The nightmare again. Flames licking at wooden support beams, thick black smoke filling the narrow passage. Men's faces contorted in panic as they screamed his name. Their voices echoed in the confined space, desperate and accusing. He'd tried to reach the exit, but his legs were impossibly heavy, as if the very earth had seized them. The tunnel entrance collapsed before him in a thunderous roar, dust and debris swallowing everything in darkness. The clock on his bedside table read 3:42 a.m. Mason's nightshirt clung to his skin, drenched in sweat despite the December chill. His heart hammered against his ribs like it might break through. 8 years since the Silverton collapse, and still the dreams came, faithful as winter snow. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, bare feet meeting cold wooden planks. Sleep wouldn't return tonight. It never did after the nightmare. The darkness of the room pressed in around him, too similar to the collapsing tunnel of his dreams, and Mason struck a match with trembling fingers, flinching at the small flare of light. He moved through the dark house with practiced stems, stopping at the wood stove in the main room. He knelt, checking that the fire was properly banked, an obsessive ritual performed every night, sometimes several times. His fingers traced the iron door, ensuring it was securely latched. No stray embers, no danger. The habit had taken root after the mine disaster, a constant vigilance against the very element that haunted his dreams. The December chill had settled deep into the cabin walls. Outside, Montana's winter darkness pressed against the windows like a living thing, waiting to devour the small sanctuary of his home. Mason lit a lamp, wincing again at the match flare, and set about making coffee. The mundane task anchored him to the present, away from memories of collapsing mine shafts and men's dying screams. His hands moved automatically, grinding the beans, measuring the grounds, setting the pot to boil. These small rituals kept him sane during the worst nights. In the yellow lamplight, shadows danced across the walls of the cabin he'd built with his own hands after everything was lost. It was a good house, solid and warm, but too large for a man alone. Too quiet. When the coffee was ready, he poured it into a thick ceramic mug, blue, with a chip in the rim, and stepped onto the front porch. The night air bit through his woolen shirt and long underwear, but he welcomed the shock of it. Pain was preferable to the numbness that had become his constant companion. The stars scattered across the sky were fading as the first hint of dawn touched the eastern horizon. A fingernail moon hung low, offering just enough light to outline the shapes of his property. Mason's breath clouded before him as he surveyed what he'd built. The barn with its fresh coat of red paint, the workshop where he spent most days, the fenced pasture where 3 horses huddled together for warmth, the ranch he'd built after everything was lost. 8 years of solitude, 8 years of hiding from who he'd been. Frederick Mason had died in that mine, or at least everything that mattered had. Mason Foster was just the shell that remained, hollow and purposeless, save for the daily tasks that kept him breathing. He took a long swallow of the bitter coffee, letting it burn down his throat. The silence of the pre-dawn was absolute, broken only by the occasional stamp of a horse's hoof from the barn or the distant call of a coyote from the ridge. This was his world now. Remote, contained, safe. No one to lose, no one to fail. When the sky lightened enough to distinguish shapes clearly, Mason noticed something unusual on his porch. A bundle of cloth near the railing that hadn't been there when he'd retired for the night. As his eyes adjusted, the bundle separated into 3 distinct forms. A woman and 2 children huddled beneath a threadbare quilt. The woman's eyes snapped open, wild, exhausted, defiant all at once. She pushed herself up slightly, careful not to disturb the small girl curled against her chest. The child couldn't have been more than 5 or 6, her face pale even in sleep. The boy, perhaps 8 or 9, stirred next, regarding Mason with wary, intelligent eyes. Mason's hand tightened around his mug, coffee sloshing over the rim. He hadn't seen strangers on his land in years, hadn't wanted to. His sanctuary, his carefully constructed isolation, had been breached. "We won't trouble you long," the woman whispered, her voice as rough as a crow's call. "Just till sunrise." Frost glittered on the porch boards around them like scattered diamonds. The stars were fading to gray, and the air bit cold enough to burn lungs. Mason's jaw worked as he considered his options. He could send them away. Should probably. A man alone didn't need complications, but there was something in the woman's eyes he recognized. Desperation, yes, but also that bone-deep exhaustion that came from carrying the world too long without rest. And pride, she wasn't begging, just stating facts, prepared for rejection, but unwilling to surrender dignity. The silence stretched long enough for another coyote to call from the ridge. "If they snore," he muttered, turning back toward the door, "I'll build a room." He left the door ajar, an invitation without words, and returned to the kitchen. His hands trembled slightly as he placed more logs in the stove, stirring the embers to life. The first strangers in his house since Catherine died, since the baby died with her. What in God's name had he just done? Behind him he heard the soft shuffle of boots, the woman's quiet breathing, the little girl's sleepy whimper. Then the door closed, and the silence wasn't silent anymore. Mason set 4 plates on the table. 4. He hadn't used 4 plates in nearly a decade. The simple act felt momentous, as if he'd crossed some invisible boundary back into the land of the living. The children stared at the food: bacon, biscuits, coffee for the adults, milk for the kids, like it was a mirage. The boy swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his thin neck. The girl's eyes went wide, blue as spring cornflowers. "Eat," Mason said, gruffer than he meant. The word came out like a command rather than the offering he intended. They ate. The children devoured everything, barely pausing to breathe. The woman ate slowly, her gaze flicking between Mason and the door, watchful as a hunted animal. She was thin, too thin, but there was strength in her bearing. Her hair was dark blonde, pulled back in a practical braid, and her eyes were a clear gray that missed nothing. Mason focused on his plate, the sounds of chewing and silverware scraping plates thunderous in his quiet house. He wasn't used to company, wasn't used to the way other bodies changed the very air in a room, making it somehow fuller, heavier with presence. When the plates were empty, the woman stood without a word and began washing dishes. "You don't have to," Mason started. "Yes, I do." Her voice was firm, brooking no argument. She worked efficiently, organizing his chaotic counter as she went. There was a grace to her movements, a practiced economy that spoke of hard work and harder times. Mason noticed her hands, rough, capable hands marked with thin white scars that didn't come from ordinary work. There was a story there, one he wasn't sure he wanted to hear. "Name's Anna," she said finally, her back still to him as she scrubbed a pan. "Anna Whitmore, this is Sam. She nodded toward the boy who sat quietly at the table, watching Mason with those careful eyes. "That's Lily." The little girl had begun exploring the room, touching the scarred wooden table, the back of a chair, a shelf of books, tentative as if expecting to be scolded. Mason nodded, didn't offer his own name yet. Names had power. Names meant connection. "My husband died 6 months ago," Anna continued, voice flat as she scrubbed a pan. "Mine collapsed near Silverton. Creditors took the house 2 weeks later. We walked 3 days to get here." Mason felt a cold weight settle in his stomach at the mention of Silverton. Of all the places, it had to be there. The town, the mines. They haunted him still. "Why here?" he asked, his voice rough with sudden emotion. Anna turned, met his eyes. Water dripped from her hands onto the floor, but neither of them looked down. "Man at the general store said you were decent. Ornery, but decent." Mason almost smiled. Almost. Ornery was fair. Ornery was decent was debatable. Sam's small voice broke in. "You got horses, Mr. Foster." It wasn't a question, but Mason looked at the boy, saw the hope there, fragile as spring ice. He nodded toward the barn. "3 of them. The black gelding is Jupiter. The bay mare is Sadie. The old pinto's Chester." The boy's face lit up like sunrise. Mason felt something crack in his chest, something that had been frozen solid for 8 years. "Barn's got a loft," he heard himself say. "Warmer than the porch. You can sleep there till I figure things out." Anna's eyes shimmered, but she didn't let the tears fall. "We'll earn our keep. I can cook, mend, work. The children can help too." "Can you swing a hammer?" Mason asked. She blinked, confusion replacing the relief on her face. "What?" That room won't build itself. Anna stared at him, processing his words, then slowly nodded once. Deal made. Mason stood, grabbed his hat. I'll inventory the timber. He walked out before she could see his hands shaking. In the barn, surrounded by the smell of hay and leather, Mason leaned against a post and closed his eyes. What was he doing? He'd spent 8 years building walls around himself, physical and otherwise. Now, in the space of a morning, he'd invited 3 strangers into his life. 3 people who could hurt him simply by leaving. He just invited strangers to stay, to help him build something. What was he building? A room? Or something far more dangerous? The next morning dawned clear and cold. Mason was up before the sun, his sleep restless and plagued by dreams. Not the usual nightmare of fire and collapsing tunnels, but new visions, of empty rooms and doors closing, of people walking away. He built up the fire in the stove, started coffee, and was midway through mixing biscuit dough when Anna appeared from the direction of the barn, her face freshly washed, hair neatly braided. "You're up early," she said, surprise evident in her voice. "Always am." Mason nodded toward the coffee pot. "Help yourself." She poured a cup, cradling it between her hands for warmth. "I can take over the cooking, if you'd like." Mason shrugged. "I'm already started." But he didn't object when she moved beside him and began rolling out the dough with practiced hands. They worked together in a silence that was surprisingly comfortable. Mason stole glances at her profile, the straight nose, the firm chin, the tiny lines at the corner of her eye that hinted at a time when she had laughed more freely. She was handsome rather than pretty, with a quiet dignity that seemed at odds with her circumstances. The children appeared as the biscuits came out of the oven, Sam alert and cautious, Lily still sleepy-eyed and clutching a small wooden doll. Breakfast was less tense than the previous night's meal. The children had lost their stunned, half-starved look, though they still ate as if food might be snatched away at any moment. Lily even smiled when Mason offered her a spoonful of honey for her biscuit, a quick, shy thing that transformed her solemn face. After breakfast, Mason measured boards in his workshop while Sam and Lily explored the property. Through the window, he could hear Lily's laugh, bright as a bell, as she chased chickens around the yard. Sam whooped, running after her. Anna hummed as she hung laundry on the line he hadn't used in years. His gaze drifted to the door frame where he'd carved growth marks years ago. Catherine plus James, 1869. His hand, his knife, his hope, buried with them both. Catherine died in childbirth 8 years ago. The baby, a boy, never drew breath. Mason traced the carving with his fingertips. Catherine had been golden, hair like summer wheat, eyes as blue as Montana sky, laugh that could warm the coldest day. Their marriage had been brief but incandescent. When the mine disaster happened, she'd been the one to nurse him back to health, to defend him against the whispers and accusations. And then, just as he was healing, she was gone. The fever took her and their son in the space of a night, leaving Mason alone with a grief too vast to comprehend. He'd built this ranch as a fortress after that, a place where grief couldn't follow because there was nothing left to feel. He'd become Mason Foster, leaving Frederick Mason and all his failures buried in an empty grave in Silverton. Lily's giggle pierced through the window again. Mason's throat tightened. He gathered his supply list and headed to the barn to saddle his horse. Town was an hour's ride. He needed nails, hinges, more timber than he had on hand. He needed to get away from the sound of children laughing. In the barn, Sam was examining an old saddle, running his small hands over the worn leather. "Can I come with you, Mr. Foster?" the boy asked, eyes hopeful. "Not today." Mason checked the cinch on his horse. "Help your mother instead." Disappointment flashed across Sam's face, but he nodded. As Mason led the horse out, Sam reached for a wooden crate on a shelf, apparently hoping to get a better look at some tools hanging above. The crate slipped from his small hands, crashing to the floor with a thunderous noise. Tools spilled out, metal striking wood in a cacophony of sound. The crash triggered something primal in Mason. His body went rigid before folding in on itself, shoulders hunching, hands flying to shield his ears. Color drained from his face as his pupils dilated with terror. His chest heaved in shallow, irregular gasps. In that moment, the barn dissolved around him, replaced by crushing darkness. the acrid smell of smoke, and ghostly echoes of men calling his name as timbers groaned and splintered around them. The commotion frightened the horse, which reared slightly. Mason recovered quickly, grabbing the reins, but his hands were visibly shaking, and a fine sheen of sweat had broken out on his forehead despite the cold. Sam stood frozen, terrified not of the noise, but of Mason's reaction. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" "It's all right," Mason managed, his voice strained. "Just don't touch anything else." Behind them, Lily had run to the barn entrance at the noise. She was crying, clinging to her mother's skirts. Anna knelt beside her daughter, whispering, "It's okay, sweetheart. Mason's not like Papa. He won't hurt us for making noise." The words hung in the air between them. Mason pretended not to hear, but his jaw tightened as he mounted his horse. With a nod to Anna, he rode away, haunted by her words and the implications they carried. At Everett's General Store in Silver Creek, Mrs. Harrington was behind the counter, her sharp eyes missing nothing. She was a stout woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair pulled into a severe bun, her mouth a permanent line of disapproval. "Heard you took in strangers," she said, not bothering with pleasantries. Mason picked up a box of nails. "That's so? Folks are talking." Mason, a woman alone with a man, no chaperone, no family. Her tone dripped with false concern and real judgment. Her fingers tapped a nervous rhythm on the counter, belying the calm superiority of her expression. Mason studied her more closely than he usually bothered to. Ethel Harrington had lost her husband and son in the Silverton disaster. Her bitterness had calcified over the years, hardening around her like armor. Perhaps her concerns about propriety stemmed not just from small-town morality, but from her own grief. Still, her prying rankled. Mason set the nails down hard enough to rattle the counter. "Mind your business, Ethel. I'm just saying, people will wonder about propriety. Let them wonder. I've got work to do." He moved through the store, gathering supplies, aware of her eyes following him. As Mason counted out nails and hinges, he noticed Reverend Phillips enter the store. The white-haired minister had kind eyes that had seen too much suffering. In a town like Silver Creek, the pastor bore witness to the full spectrum of human experience: birth and death, joy and tragedy. Phillips was one of the few people Mason respected, though he avoided the man's gentle attempts to draw him into the community. The minister approached with a gentle nod. "Mason," he said quietly, "I hear you're helping a widow and her children." "That a sin, Reverend?" Mason challenged, defenses rising automatically. Phillips shook his head. "No, but many don't understand kindness without conditions." He lowered his voice, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. "Some folks still remember Frederick Mason and the Silverton disaster. They'll look for reasons to find fault." Mason stiffened. He hadn't heard his real name spoken aloud in years. The sound of it was like a knife between his ribs. "Frederick Mason is dead," he muttered. "Has been for 8 years." "Is he?" Phillips asked softly. "Or just buried?" Mason paid for his supplies without answering, the weight of the minister's words heavy on his shoulders. As he loaded his purchases, Mrs. Harrington's words nagged at him. Helping Anna meant choosing her over the town's approval. He could still send her away quietly. No one would blame him. He'd be safe alone, the way he'd been, but the thought of the empty barn loft, of meals without Sam's careful questions or Lily's shy smiles, was suddenly unbearable. At the edge of town, he passed the dry goods store. In the window hung calico fabric, pale blue with tiny yellow flowers. Catherine used to love fabric like that. She'd made curtains for their small cabin, transforming the rough-hewn space with touches of beauty. Mason tied his horse, went inside, and bought 3 yards of the blue calico. For curtains, he told himself. For the room. He didn't examine why his heart was pounding, or why, for the first time in years, he found himself thinking of the future rather than the past. When Mason returned to the ranch, the afternoon light was slanting through the trees, casting long shadows across the yard. The smell of cooking greeted him before he even entered the house, something rich and savory that made his stomach tighten with unexpected hunger. Inside, the table was set for 4. Anna had made stew, the smell of it, onions, beef, thyme, filling the house like a memory of something he'd lost. The hearth fire burned steady and the floors had been swept clean. Even the windows gleamed, free of the dust that had accumulated over months of neglect. Sam looked up from his seat. Will you say grace, Mr. Foster? Mason froze in the doorway. Grace at his table with a family that wasn't his. He could turn away, eat in the barn, keep the walls up. Instead, he hung his hat, sat down, bowed his head. Lord, he said, voice rough from disuse, thank you for this food and for the hands that made it. Amen. When he looked up, Anna's eyes were shining in the lamplight. The room wasn't his anymore. Maybe it never would be again. Dinner was quiet but not uncomfortable. Anna asked careful questions about the ranch, the animals, the land. Mason answered in short sentences that gradually lengthened as the meal progressed. The children watched this exchange with fascination, as if witnessing some complex adult ritual they didn't quite understand. After dinner, Anna put the children to bed in the barn loft. When she returned, Mason was sitting by the fire, staring into the flames from a safe distance. He held the package of blue calico in his hands, awkward now that the moment to present it had come. Thank you, she said, standing in the doorway. For the food, the shelter. Mason nodded, unable to find words. The fabric seemed suddenly presumptuous, an assumption of permanence where none had been promised. You flinch at loud noises, Anna observed quietly. The children do too. Mason's head snapped up. What happened to them, he asked, avoiding her observation about himself. Anna sank into the chair opposite him, the firelight casting shadows across her face, highlighting the sharp angles of her cheekbones. William, my husband, he wasn't a good man when he drank. She rolled up her sleeve, revealing old scars on her forearm, pale lines that told a story of violence. He hit me twice, terrified the children. Mason's hand tightened around the fabric until his knuckles went white. A man who raises his hand to his family isn't a man, he said, each word sharp as broken glass. He's a coward. How do you know? Anna asked softly. Because I've seen too many men like that. None of them deserve the title. They sat in silence. The fire popped and hissed, shadows dancing on the walls around them. Outside, the wind picked up, sighing around the eaves of the house. I was ashamed, Anna continued eventually. Thought it was my fault. Thought I deserved it. You didn't. She looked at him, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time. There was something in her gaze that made Mason want to turn away. A clear-eyed assessment that seemed to see past his defenses. The children still jump at loud noises. Sam used to be so curious, always asking questions. Now he's afraid to speak up. And Lily, she trailed off, gazing into the fire. She used to sing all the time. Now she only does when she thinks no one can hear. They'll heal, Mason said, given time. Safety. Is that why you're out here alone? Healing? Mason stood abruptly. It's late. We start on the room tomorrow. He held out the blue calico, awkward as a schoolboy. For curtains, if you want them. Anna took the fabric, her fingers brushing his. It's beautiful. Thank you. She looked up at him, a smile touching her lips for the first time. You're a surprising man, Mason Foster. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak, and retreated to his bedroom, where the silence felt emptier than it had just a day before. That night, Mason sat alone on his porch long after Anna had returned to the barn. The moon cast silver light on the yard, illuminating the spot where the new room would stand. The stars hung low and bright, witnesses to a change he hadn't anticipated. His fingers traced the wood of the porch railing, feeling each groove and imperfection. Like these boards, people carried their own marks, some visible, others hidden. A few careless words from Anna had revealed so much. A boy who flinched at sudden sounds, a girl who silenced her songs, a woman bearing scars both seen and unseen. For the first time since Catherine's death, Mason felt something stir within him beyond grief, a fierce, unexpected protectiveness. It frightened him, this sudden care for people who were still strangers. Yet as he listened to the night sounds, the distant call of an owl, the soft whicker of horses in the barn, and yes, the faint sound of a child snoring drifting from the loft, he recognized a truth he'd been avoiding. His solitude hadn't been peace. It had been an absence. And now, with these three unexpected visitors, the empty spaces were filling with something that felt dangerously like purpose. 2 weeks passed like a dream Mason kept trying to wake from. The room rose plank by plank. Foundation laid, walls framed, the skeleton of something new taking shape beside the house. Each day brought progress, measured in nails driven, boards secured, and the slow restoration of something Mason had thought long dead within himself. Anna insisted on helping. She held boards steady while he hammered, mixed mortar without being asked, measured twice like he'd shown her. Her hands, once soft from a life of relative comfort, grew calloused and strong. She learned quickly, anticipating his needs before he voiced them. "You've done this before," Mason observed one morning as they fitted a window frame. Anna nodded, adjusting her grip on the wood. "My father was a carpenter. I spent summers helping in his shop before I married." A shadow crossed her face. William didn't approve of women doing men's work, said it wasn't proper. "William sounds like a fool," Mason said, driving a nail home with more force than necessary. A ghost of a smile touched Anna's lips. He was many things. A fool was certainly one of them. Sam fetched tools, his small hands careful and eager. The boy followed Mason like a shadow, watching his every move with intense concentration. He still startled at loud noises, but less violently than before. Progress, slow but steady. Lily painted with a bucket of water, creating dark patterns on the wooden walls that evaporated in the sun. She sang nonsense songs that somehow made the work lighter, her clear voice rising and falling like birdsong. Sometimes she would stop abruptly if she caught Mason listening, retreating into watchful silence. "Keep singing," he told her one afternoon. "It's nice." She regarded him solemnly, blue eyes wide in her small face. "Papa didn't like noise." "I do," Mason said simply, "especially singing." After that, Lily sang more freely, her repertoire expanding to include songs Anna had taught her and melodies she created herself. Mason taught Sam to hammer. "Hold it firm," he instructed, guiding the boy's small hand. "Let the tool do the work." Sam's first nail went in crooked. His second split the wood. His third sank clean. The pride on his face could have lit the whole valley. "I did it," he exclaimed, looking up at Mason with wonder. "You did." Mason squeezed his shoulder. The contact felt strange. Good. Terrifying. "Papa said I was clumsy," Sam confessed quietly. "Said I couldn't do anything right." "He was wrong," Mason said simply. "You just needed practice." In the evenings, they ate together. Anna mended Mason's torn shirts without asking, her needle quick and precise. The house smelled like fresh bread, coffee, wood smoke, like life. Sometimes Mason would find himself pausing in the middle of a task, caught off guard by the simple pleasure of company. The sound of Anna humming as she worked in the kitchen. The sight of Sam diligently brushing Chester, the old Pinto. Lily's drawings rendered in charcoal on scraps of paper, pinned to the wall beside the stove. One afternoon, Mason was hoisting a beam for the ceiling. Anna stepped in to help, their hands brushing as they positioned it. Her fingers were calloused now, like his. She looked at him. He looked away, but his pulse hammered louder than any nail. At night, lying in his bed, Mason would strain to catch the muffled sounds drifting from the barn loft. Anna's measured breathing, like gentle waves against shore. Lily's occasional mumbling, fragments of dreams escaping into the world. And Sam, the rhythmic, gentle rumble that rose and fell with each breath. Mason found himself counting the beats, letting the simple pattern anchor him to something beyond his own memories. The boy actually snored, just as he'd joked about. The realization tugged at something long dormant within him. By the end of the second week, the room's frame stood complete. Roof joists ready, windows cut. It looked like a skeleton waiting for flesh. Anna stood beside him at sunset, surveying their work. The fading light painted the new timber gold. "It's almost a home," she whispered. Mason didn't correct her, didn't say room instead of home, because she was right. That night, he carved something into the doorframe when no one was looking. Sam and Lily, 1877. He stepped back, stared at the names. What was he doing? Building a room or building a family? His chest ached with hope and terror in equal measure. Tomorrow he'd start the roof. Tomorrow they'd be one step closer to finished. And he realized with a jolt like lightning he didn't want them to leave. Late evening, fire crackling, children asleep in the barn loft. Anna sat by the hearth, staring into the flames. Mason poured 2 whiskeys, handed her one. "You don't have to talk." he said quietly, but I'll listen if you do. She took the glass, sipped, winced. The amber liquid caught the firelight as she swirled it thoughtfully. Tell me about the nightmares, she said. Mason went still. What nightmares? I've seen your light, late at night, heard you pacing. Her eyes, gray as winter sky, met his. And I recognized the look. The one that says you're seeing ghosts no one else can see. Mason stared into his glass. The silence stretched, broken only by the pop and hiss of burning wood. I was a mine foreman, he said finally. Each word dragged from some deep place within him. Silverton, 1869. Anna's breath caught. The collapse, he thought. He nodded once, sharply. 12 men died. Should have been 13. You survived. I survived. His voice was flat, emotionless, but his knuckles were white around the glass. I went back in 3 times, pulled out men, one by one. The 4th time, the tunnel gave way. I was pinned, half buried. They dug me out 2 days later. You tried to save them, Anna said softly. Mason's laugh was bitter as winter wind. Tried and failed. The company needed a scapegoat. Easier to blame the half-dead foreman than admit they'd ignored my reports about unsafe conditions. So they accused you of abandoning your men. The papers called me a coward, said I ran while my men burned. He drained his glass in one swallow. My wife, Catherine, she stood by me, nursed me back to health. We moved away, started fresh, and then his voice broke. She died in childbirth, her and our son, James. Anna's eyes shimmered in the firelight. I'm sorry. 8 years ago, I buried Frederick Mason with them, became Mason Foster instead. He looked up at her. No one here knows, except the Reverend, I suspect. And now me, Anna said, and now you. The admission hung between them, a fragile bridge across the chasm of their separate griefs. Anna set her glass down, rolled up her sleeve. The scars on her forearm were thin and white in the firelight. William wasn't always cruel. When we married, he was kind, ambitious, wanted to make something of himself. Her voice was steady, but her fingers traced the scars unconsciously. After our daughter was born, he changed, started drinking, lost jobs, blamed us for his failures. The first time he hit me, he wept afterward, promised never again. Her smile was sad. I believed him. The second time, he didn't even apologize. Mason's jaw clenched. No man should ever— I know, Anna cut him off gently. I know that now. But when you're in it, you start to believe you deserve it. That if you were just better, kinder, quieter, it wouldn't happen. The children, Mason said, he never hit them, but they saw, heard. Her voice caught. Sam tried to defend me once. William threw him against a wall. He was 7. A rage unlike anything Mason had felt in years rose within him. It was almost a relief, this burning fury after so much numbness. If he wasn't already dead. But he is, Anna said, and we survived. They sat in silence. The fire popped. Outside, an owl called into the night. I ran after he died, Anna confessed, her voice barely audible. The debt was real, but I also ran because I was free. She looked up at Mason, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Does that make me terrible? Makes you human, he answered. A log shifted in the fire, sending up a shower of sparks. Anna watched them rise and disappear. Earlier today, Mason said slowly, Sam asked if he could call me sir instead of Mr. Foster. He stared at his empty glass. I said yes, but I wanted— He couldn't finish. Wanted what? I don't know, something more. He set the glass down with deliberate care. That scares me more than anything. Why? Because wanting things, his voice cracked in, wanting things means they can be taken away. Anna reached across the space between them, touched his hand. Her palm was warm, rough, real. I'm scared too, she whispered. But maybe that's how we know it matters. Mason turned his hand over, laced his fingers with hers. They didn't kiss. It was too soon, too fragile. But the touch said everything. Outside, the wind rose. A storm was coming. Mason could smell it on the air. Anna pulled her hand back gently. The preacher came by yesterday, while you were hunting. Mason's stomach dropped. What did he want? Ask questions about us, about the arrangement. She looked away into the dying fire. People are talking, Mason. Mrs. Harrington's have been telling everyone we're living in sin. We're not. I know, but they don't care about truth. They care about appearances. Mason's hands curled into fists. Let them talk. What if they don't just talk? What if they try to take the children? The words hung in the air like a blade. They wouldn't. They might. Anna stood pacing. Alice Warner, the town clerk, he mentioned marriage to me, said he'd take us in, make it respectable. Mason's heart stopped. Are you considering it? Anna's eyes filled with tears. I don't want to, but if it keeps my children safe, don't. Mason cut her off, standing to face her. Don't marry a man you don't love to satisfy gossips. Well, then what do I do? The desperation in her voice cut him to the quick. He wanted to say stay. Wanted to say, we'll fight them together. Wanted to say, I'm falling in love with you and it terrifies me. Instead, he said, let me think. Anna nodded, wiped her eyes, but they both knew the storm was closer than the weather vane showed. Sunday noon, 3 horses in the yard. Mason saw them from the barn where he was mending tack. His stomach turned to ice. Mrs. Harrington, town clerk Silas Warner, Reverend Phillips. Anna stood on the porch, arms crossed like armor. Mason walked over slowly, jaw tight enough to crack teeth. Mr. Foster, Mrs. Harrington's smile was sharp as a knife. We've come with concerns for the children. Have you? Mason's voice was dangerously quiet. Silas Warner was a narrow man with thinning hair and shrewd eyes. As town clerk, he wielded significant influence in Silver Creek. He was a widower himself, his wife having succumbed to fever a decade earlier. The neat cut of his coat and the polished buttons spoke of a man concerned with appearance. Reverend Phillips stood slightly apart from the other two, his kind face troubled. The community worries about the moral environment here, the Reverend said, choosing his words carefully. An unmarried woman, an unmarried man, children in the middle. We're doing nothing wrong, Anna said, voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Appearances matter, Mrs. Whitmore. Silas stepped forward, hat in hand, playing the gentleman. I've come with a solution. Marry me. I'll take you and the children in. Respectable. Proper. Mason's vision went red. The presumption of the man, as if Anna were a piece of property to be claimed, set his blood boiling. Think of the children, Mrs. Harrington pressed. What kind of example is this setting? Perhaps Mrs. Whitmore should relocate to the boarding house until proper arrangements. We ain't done nothing wrong, Sam's voice cracked like thunder. The boy stood in the barn doorway, tears streaming down his face. I don't want to go. He ran to Mason, grabbed his hand. You promised you'd teach me to ride. You promised! Mason's heart shattered. He knelt to Sam's eye level. The boy's face was red, desperate, breaking. Don't let them take us. Please. Sam's whisper was for Mason alone. Mason looked up at Anna, saw her breaking too, saw her considering Silas's offer. Not because she wanted to, but because she'd sacrifice anything for her children. He should speak, should fight. But the words stuck in his throat, because speaking meant risking everything, meant standing against the whole town, meant choosing them fully, publicly, irrevocably. And he was terrified. The silence stretched. Silas smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. Mrs. Whitmore, shall we discuss terms? Anna's face crumpled. I need to think. Of course, we'll return tomorrow for your answer. Silas replaced his hat with a small bow. Consider carefully, Mrs. Whitmore. A woman alone has few options. They left. Mason stood there, still holding Sam's hand, feeling like he'd just failed every test that mattered. That night, Anna packed. Her movements were methodical, efficient, hiding the pain evident in her eyes. The children were quiet, subdued, as if they'd known all along this sanctuary was temporary. Mason worked on the room until midnight, hammering nails like he could fix his cowardice with wood and iron. The roof was nearly finished, the walls solid. Just a few more days' work, and it would be complete. A perfect room for a family that was leaving. As he worked, he cursed himself for his silence. He'd survived a mine collapse, built a ranch from nothing, endured 8 years of solitude, and yet he couldn't find the courage to stand up to town gossips, to claim what he wanted. The room was nearly finished, but the family was leaving, and it was his fault. 3 days passed. The ranch was silent as a grave. Mason moved through his chores mechanically, the routine that had once been comforting, now a hollow mockery of living. He sat in the empty room, surrounded by the things they'd left behind. Lily's rag doll, forgotten in the rush to leave. Sam's wooden horse, the one Mason had carved new legs for when the original ones broke. Anna's shawl, still smelling of lavender and wood. He held the shawl, buried his face in it. The room was finished. Roof, walls, windows, the door frame with their names carved in it. Sam and Lily, 1877. A monument to his cowardice. He'd built the room, but he hadn't fought for the people who were supposed to fill it. Mason uncorked a bottle of whiskey, drank straight from it. The liquor burned down his throat, a welcome pain. Catherine's voice echoed in his memory from the last coherent moment before the fever took her. "Don't let grief make you small, Mason," she'd whispered, her hand cool against his cheek. "Live big, love big." He'd betrayed her, built walls instead of a life. He stared at the bottle, then threw it against the wall. The crash was satisfying. Brief. From a drawer beneath his bed, Mason pulled out an old envelope. The edges were worn soft from handling, though he hadn't opened it in years. Inside were newspaper clippings about the Silverton mine disaster of 1869. One headline read, "Frederick Mason, only foreman to survive." The article accused him of abandoning his men to save himself, of fleeing while others burned. Every word a lie, but repeated so often it had taken on the weight of truth. The reality was different. He'd gone back in 3 times, dragging out men one by one until the final collapse nearly killed him too. But the mine owners needed a scapegoat, and a half-dead foreman with severe burns and no family in town made a convenient target. Among the clippings was a list of names, the men who had died and the 3 he'd managed to save. Robert Parker, James Whitfield, Thomas Guthrie. He tried to follow up with them after he recovered, to see if they would speak on his behalf, but they had already left town. Survival came with its own guilt, he supposed. He'd changed his name, moved away, built a new life, or at least the shell of one. For 8 years he'd been hiding from who he was, what he'd done, and what had been done to him. Mason took the list of names and a pencil. At the bottom he wrote, Anna Whitmore, then Samuel Whitmore, then Lily Whitmore. 3 more people he had failed to protect. That night Mason fell into an exhausted sleep. For the first time in 8 years he dreamed of Catherine. But this time she wasn't accusing him, wasn't dying. She was smiling, touching his face. "Frederick," she whispered, using his real name. "I never wanted you to die with me. Live, my love. Love again." He woke with tears on his face and a new resolve. Dawn broke cold and clear. Mason didn't sleep. He saddled his horse and rode to town, found Anna at the boarding house working in the kitchen to pay rent. The boarding house was a 3-story wooden structure on the main street, paint peeling from its facade. Inside, the air was stale with the smell of old cooking and too many bodies. Anna stood at a large sink, scrubbing pots, her back to the door. She looked thin, exhausted, defeated. Her hair, usually neatly braided, hung limply down her back. He pushed through the door. She turned, eyes widening. "Mason, I've been dead 8 years." His voice was low, rough, but steady. "You and those children woke me up. If the town wants to judge, let them. But you belong on that ranch. We do." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Mason, they'll make our lives hell." "Let them try. I'll build walls so high their gossip can't climb." "What about the children? What if they—" "The room's got their names carved in the door frame. Permanent. You hear me? You're not temporary. You're not charity. You're home." Anna sobbed, once, hard. Then Sam burst from the back room. "You came for us!" Mason dropped to his knees, caught the boy in his arms. "Should have come sooner. I'm sorry." Lily ran out next, grabbing Mason's neck. "Can we go home now?" Mason lifted her, held them both, looked at Anna over their heads. "Yes, little one, we're going home." Anna wiped her face, nodded. They gathered their few belongings in silence, ignoring the curious stares of the boarding house patrons. The proprietress, a thin woman with disapproving eyes, watched from behind her desk. Mrs. Whitmore, you still owe for yesterday's board. Mason placed coins on the counter. That should cover it. This isn't proper, the woman hissed. A woman like her, with children, living with a man. A woman like what? Mason's voice was deadly quiet. A widow trying to survive? A mother protecting her children? He leaned closer. Choose your next words carefully. The woman's mouth snapped shut. They walked out together, boarding house patrons staring, whispering. Mrs. Harrington stood on the boardwalk across the street, face twisted with disapproval. Mason looked her dead in the eye. Judge her. Judge me. He didn't stop walking. They rode home in the wagon, children tucked between them. The day was bright, the air crisp with winter's promise. As they crested the final hill, the ranch appeared below, the house, the barn, the new room gleaming with fresh timber. Sam pointed. Look, the room's finished. It was, and so finally was Mason's fear. The next morning a wagon rolled into the yard. Mason tensed, then recognized the driver. Old Joseph Blackwell, the blacksmith from the edge of town. Joseph was approaching 70, with arms corded with muscle and a beard shot through with gray. He'd been one of the few people Mason dealt with regularly, bringing horses for shoeing or tools that needed repair. Heard you're building, Joseph called. Figured you could use help. Another wagon followed, then another. Margaret Hayes, a widow who'd lost her husband the same year Mason lost Catherine. Young Timothy from the feed store. Even Reverend Phillips, sleeves rolled up, ready to work. Not everyone, of course. Mrs. Harrington and her faction stayed away, faces pinched with disapproval from a distance. But enough people who understood that love mattered more than gossip. They descended on the room like a barn raising. Finishing touches Mason hadn't gotten to. Trim, shelves, a second coat of whitewash. Sam and Lily painted their walls. Blue sky, yellow sun, a brown horse that looked suspiciously like Chester. Anna hung the calico curtains Mason had bought weeks ago. They framed the windows like hope. By sunset, the room was complete. 2 small beds made, a tiny stove installed, rag rugs on the floor. The children's few belongings arranged carefully on the shelves. Reverend Phillips appeared in the doorway, hat in hand. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. All of you. The church failed you, Mrs. Whitmore. I failed you. I let fear and judgment speak louder than grace. Anna looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. Thank you for saying so. Would you allow me to bless this home? Mason glanced at Anna. She glanced at the children. Sam nodded. All right, Mason said. They gathered in the new room. Mason, Anna, Sam, Lily, and the handful of neighbors who'd helped. Reverend Phillips raised his hand. May this home be filled with love. May these walls shelter joy and mercy. May this family, he paused, looked at Mason and Anna. However it's formed, know peace in Jesus' name. Amen, they echoed. That night, after everyone left, the 4 of them stood in the children's room. Sam climbed into his bed, ran his hand over the quilt Margaret Hayes had brought, a wedding ring pattern in blues and greens. It's really ours? He asked. Really yours, Mason confirmed. Lily hugged her ragdoll. Forever? Anna kissed her forehead. Forever. They left a lamp burning low, closed the door halfway. Mason and Anna stood in the main house, suddenly alone. Thank you, she whispered, for fighting for us. I should have fought sooner. You fought when it mattered. She touched his face. He leaned into her palm. They didn't kiss. Not yet. But they stood there in the soft glow of lamplight, her hand on his cheek, his eyes closed, breathing each other in. No words were needed. The house creaked gently around them, settling into the night as if pleased to shelter more than one soul again. Outside, stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. Inside, from the children's room, came the soft sounds of peaceful sleep. Lily's gentle sigh, Sam's rhythmic breathing. Mason's lips curved in a smile of wonder. Just weeks ago, he'd made his joke about building a room for snoring strangers. Now those strangers had names, faces, stories intertwined with his. Listen to that, he whispered. Anna's eyes questioned him. The sound of promises kept, he said simply. Her answering smile held both understanding and hope, the beginning of something neither had dared imagine finding again. Mason jerked awake, disoriented in the strange half-light filling his bedroom. Orange and yellow shadows danced across the ceiling like twisted memories come to life. For one disorienting moment, he thought he was still trapped in his recurring nightmare. Then came the unmistakable sound that had haunted him for 8 years, the hungry crackle of flames devouring wood. This was no dream. He stumbled into the main room to find Anna silhouetted against the hellish glow, her face a mask of horror. The blue calico curtains he'd bought weeks earlier, Catherine's curtains in all but name, had become a wall of fire. Flames licked greedily up the walls toward the ceiling beams, devouring 8 years of solitude and 3 months of newfound joy with equal indifference. The children, he gasped. Anna was already moving, throwing open the door to the new room. Sam! Lily! Wake up! Mason grabbed a blanket, tried to beat out the flames, but they were spreading too quickly. The heat was intense, sweat pouring down his face as he fought the growing inferno. Take them outside, he shouted to Anna. Get clear of the house. She emerged from the children's room, a child under each arm. Lily was crying, Sam white-faced with terror. Mason, come now, Anna pleaded. I need to try. No, it's too late. The roof beam above the stove cracked ominously. Mason looked up, saw the flames eating through the wood. In seconds, it would collapse. For a moment, he was back in the mine, timbers falling, men screaming. The paralysis of that moment threatened to overtake him again. Then he heard Lily's sobs, Sam's desperate call, Mason, please. With a final look at the home he'd built, Mason ran. He was barely clear of the door when the beam gave way, crashing through the floor with a shower of sparks. They huddled together in the yard, watching the main house burn. The fire was too intense, too established to fight. All they could do was ensure it didn't spread to the barn or outbuildings. Lily clung to Mason, her face buried in his shoulder. I'm sorry, she sobbed. It's my fault. What? No, sweetheart. How could it be your fault? I wanted to make you a surprise. A picture. She hiccuped. I lit the lamp myself, but it fell over. I was scared, so I ran back to bed. Mason held her tighter. It was an accident, Lily. Just an accident. But as he watched the flames consume 8 years of his life, he couldn't help but wonder if it was something more. If this fire, like the one before it, was a dividing line between past and future. By morning, only the stone chimney remained of the main house. The new room, set slightly apart, had survived with only minor scorching. The barn and workshop were untouched. They stood in the dawn light, soot-stained and exhausted, surveying the damage. Anna slipped her hand into Mason's. I'm so sorry, she whispered. He shook his head. It's just things. Wood. We're all alive. He looked down at her. That's what matters. Sam approached, his face solemn. What do we do now, Mason? Mason regarded the boy, then looked at the ruins of his house, the surviving room, the workshop and barn, the land that stretched to the horizon, still his. We rebuild, he said simply, together. Anna squeezed his hand. Together. As they stood there watching smoke curl into the clear morning sky, Mason realized something. The fire had taken his house, but not his home. Not anymore. Home was Sam's careful questions and Lily's songs. Home was Anna's hand in his. Home was no longer a place, but people. And for the first time in 8 years, he was truly not alone. Word spread quickly about the fire. By midday, wagons began arriving, neighbors with food, blankets, offers of help. Joseph Blackwell brought tools. Margaret Hayes, quilts and cooking pots. Even Silas Warner appeared, hat in hand, with lumber from his own stores. I heard about the fire, Silas said stiffly. I've come to help. Mason studied the man, searching for ulterior motives. Why? Because it's the right thing to do. Silas cleared his throat. And because I owe Mrs. Whitmore an apology, my offer was presumptuous. Mason nodded once, accepting the gesture for what it was. We need all the help we can get. They set up temporary quarters in the barn loft. The children would sleep in the surviving room, while Mason and Anna made do with bedrolls in the hayloft. It wasn't ideal, but they'd survived worse. That evening, as Mason and Joseph worked on plans for the new house, a rider arrived from town. It was Timothy, the young man from the feed store, his face grave. Mason, he called, dismounting. There's talk in town about the fire. Mason straightened. What talk? Mrs. Harrington's been saying, Timothy glanced at Anna, who stood nearby. She's saying it was divine judgment for living in sin. Anna's face paled. Mason's hands curled into fists. There's more, Timothy continued reluctantly. She's gone to the circuit judge. Says the children aren't safe here. What? Anna gasped. She's trying to have them removed, placed with proper Christian families. Mason saw Anna sway, reached out to steady her. She can't do that. She's trying, Timothy said grimly. Judge Wilson arrives tomorrow. That night, Mason sat alone on the porch of the surviving room, staring at the stars. Anna joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the night chill. They won't take my children, she said, her voice steel. I'll run if I have to. It won't come to that. Won't it? You heard Timothy. Mrs. Harrington has influence. Mason was quiet for a long moment. There's a way, he said finally, but I won't suggest it unless you want it too. For itself, not just necessity. Anna looked at him, understanding dawning in her eyes. Marriage, like. He nodded. It would solve the legal problem. But Anna, he took her hand, I won't have you trade one prison for another. Is that what you think marriage to you would be? A prison? No, but I want you to choose it, not have it forced upon you. Anna's eyes shimmered in the starlight. Ask me properly, Mason Foster, or should I say, Frederick Mason? He smiled faintly. You'd take back my real name? It's who you are, who you've always been beneath the hiding. She squeezed his hand. A good, brave man who went back into a burning mine to save others, who opened his home to strangers on a cold porch, who carved children's names into a doorframe because he wanted them to stay. Mason stood, pulling Anna to her feet. Then, to her surprise, he knelt. Anna Whitmore, he said, voice rough with emotion, I've been half alive for 8 years. You and those children brought me back. Will you marry me? Not for the judge, not for the gossips. For us. Anna's smile was like sunrise. Yes, for us. When he rose, they finally kissed. Tentative at first, then with growing certainty. A beginning after so much ending. From the doorway, Sam's voice broke the moment. Does this mean we're staying? For real? They turned to find both children watching, Lily clutching her doll, Sam with hopeful eyes. For real, Mason confirmed. If that's what you want. Sam's grin was answer enough. Lily ran forward, wrapping her arms around Mason's legs. Can I call you Papa now? She asked, looking up at him with those solemn blue eyes. Mason felt his throat tighten. I'd like that very much. That night, for the first time since the mine disaster, Mason slept without nightmares. Judge Wilson arrived the next morning, a stern man with silver hair and penetrating eyes. Mrs. Harrington accompanied him, her face a mask of righteous concern. They found Mason and Anna in the yard, supervising as neighbors raised the frame for a new house. The children were helping too, Sam handing nails to Joseph, Lily sorting kindling into piles. Mr. Foster, the judge said, dismounting, I'm Judge Wilson. I've come about a complaint regarding the welfare of these children. Mason stepped forward. Judge Wilson, we've been expecting you. This is Anna Whitmore, the children's mother. The judge nodded to Anna. Ma'am, I understand there's been a fire. Yes, sir, Anna replied steadily. An accident with a lamp. We're rebuilding. And your relationship with Mr. Foster? We're to be married, Mason said before Miss Harrington could interject. Tomorrow, Reverend Phillips will perform the ceremony. The judge raised an eyebrow. Is that so? It is, Anna confirmed. Mason and I had already decided before we heard about your visit. Mrs. Harrington stepped forward, unable to contain herself. Judge Wilson, surely you see through this convenient arrangement. These children need proper... Mrs. Harrington, the judge cut her off. I appreciate your concern, but I see children who appear well-fed, well-clothed, and engaged in productive activity. I see a community coming together to help a family in need. He turned back to Mason and Anna. I'll stay for the wedding if I may. To witness. Of course, Mason said, relief washing through him. And Mrs. Harrington, the judge added, perhaps your energies would be better spent helping your neighbors than policing their private affairs. Mrs. Harrington's face flushed crimson. Without another word, she turned and stalked back to her horse. That evening, Reverend Phillips arrived to discuss the ceremony. It will be simple, he said, but meaningful. God doesn't require elaborate displays. As he was leaving, the Reverend took Mason aside. I knew Frederick Mason, you know. before the disaster. Mason stiffened. Did you? I did, a good man, conscientious, always concerned about his men's safety. The Reverend's eyes were kind but penetrating. I never believed what they wrote in the papers. Why didn't you say anything? Would it have mattered it? When a man is determined to punish himself, others' opinions rarely sway him. Phillips placed a hand on Mason's shoulder. But that time is past, isn't it? Mason looked over at Anna, helping Lily arrange wildflowers in a jar for the wedding. At Sam, proudly showing Joseph a nail he'd driven perfectly. Yes, Mason said, it is. The wedding took place the next day at noon. The new house was just a frame, but they decorated it with ribbons and flowers. The entire community turned out, even Silas Warner, who brought a rocking chair as a gift. Mrs. Harrington was conspicuously absent. Anna wore a simple dress borrowed from Margaret Hayes, with Lily's wildflowers in her hair. Mason wore his Sunday shirt, freshly pressed. Sam stood proudly beside him, chest puffed out with importance as he held the rings. Simple bands Joseph had forged from a silver dollar. As Reverend Phillips spoke the familiar words, Mason looked into Anna's eyes and saw not just the present, but a future. Christmases and birthdays. Sam growing tall and strong. Lily's songs filling a new house. A family built not from obligation, but choice, Omatu. I now pronounce you husband and wife, Phillips concluded. What God has joined together, let no one put asunder. As Mason kissed his bride, cheers erupted from the gathered neighbors. Judge Wilson nodded approvingly. The children danced around them, giddy with excitement. That night, after the celebration, after the children were asleep in their room, Mason and Anna stood together under the stars. The foundation of their new home lay before them, the skeleton of walls rising from the earth. It's strange, Anna said, her head on Mason's shoulder. 6 months ago, I thought my life was over. Now it feels like it's just beginning. Mason pulled her closer. Mine too. Frederick, she said, testing his real name. Does it feel different, being yourself again? He considered this. My different, more complete. He looked down at her. How about you, Mrs. Mason? Different. Her smile was luminous in the moonlight. Being Anna Mason feels right, like I've finally found where I belong. From the children's room came the soft sound of snoring. Mason chuckled. The room, he murmured. What? I said I'd build a room if they snored. He gestured to the frame of the new house rising around them. Look what that led to. Anna's laugh was soft, musical. A home, a family. A life, Mason agreed. A real one, finally. The weeks that followed settled them into the rhythms of a shared life. Mornings began before dawn, with Mason stoking the fire while Anna prepared breakfast. The children had their chores, Sam feeding the livestock, Lily collecting eggs from the hen house. They worked as a unit now, each person's tasks flowing into the others. Sunday evenings became sacred family time. After a day of rest, they gathered around the kitchen table for games. Sam had revealed an unexpected talent for chess, his careful mind plotting several moves ahead. Mason taught him the strategies his own father had once shared. Lily preferred checkers, her impulsive style often catching Anna off guard. Their laughter during these games seemed to warm the house more effectively than any fire. Mason found himself watching these moments with a sense of wonder. The way Anna tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when concentrating. How Sam's serious expression occasionally broke into a grin when he executed a clever move. The determined set of Lily's jaw when she was losing, but refused to give up. One evening, as Mason was repairing Sam's boots by the fire, the boy sat beside him, watching intently. Can you teach me? Sam asked. Mason looked up, surprised. To mend leather? Sam nodded. I want to learn everything you know. Something tightened in Mason's chest. He handed Sam the awl, positioned the boy's fingers correctly around it. Steady pressure, he instructed, not too fast. As Sam made his first careful stitch, Mason caught Anna's eye across the room. She was teaching Lily to knit, their heads bent together over tangled yarn. Anna smiled, and in that silent exchange, Mason felt the profound simplicity of what they'd built. Not just a house, but a place where skills and stories could be passed on, where learning flowed between them all like water. Above them, the Montana sky spread vast and star-filled, promising tomorrow and all the days after. days they would face together as a family built from broken pieces made whole again. The weeks following their marriage were filled with determined industry as the community rallied around the Mason family. From dawn till dusk, the sound of hammers and saws filled the air, punctuated by Joseph Blackwell's booming laughter and Timothy's enthusiastic whistling as they raised the frame of the new house. Even Silas Warner contributed, quietly delivering loads of quality timber from his own supplies, perhaps seeking redemption for his earlier presumption. Winter arrived with a vengeance, forcing them to adapt to close quarters. The children in their original room, Mason and Anna, making do with makeshift accommodations in the workshop, transformed with quilts from Margaret Hayes and sturdy furniture donated by families from Reverend Phillips' congregation. Despite the cramped conditions, there was a warmth that had nothing to do with the stove's heat. In the evenings, Mason would read aloud by lamplight, while Anna mended and the children listened, wide-eyed at tales of adventure, their breaths forming small clouds in the chilly air. Christmas came with unexpected bounty. The children, convinced they would have little to celebrate amidst the rebuilding, woke to find hand-carved toys from Mason, warm mittens knitted by Anna, and an astonishing number of parcels from townspeople, including a particularly fine doll for Lily that everyone suspected had come from Mrs. Harrington, though she would never admit it. By February, the roof was on and the walls complete. They moved into the unfinished house with ceremony, Mason carrying Lily across the threshold, while Sam and Anna followed with armloads of belongings, all four of them laughing as they navigated around stacks of lumber and buckets of tools. Each room was completed one by one, the family adapting around the construction like water flowing around stones in a creek. Spring came early that year. The snow melted, wildflowers pushed through mud, columbine and Indian paintbrush bright as promises against the newly greened landscape. The mountains stood sentinel in the distance, their peaks still white with the winter's hold, but in the valley, life stirred with renewed vigor. Mason woke to the sound he'd once joked about, soft snoring from the children's room. He smiled before his eyes even opened, savoring the gentle rhythm that had become as familiar as his own heartbeat. Anna was already up, moving quietly around the kitchen of their now completed home, the scent of coffee and biscuits filling the air. 6 months had passed since the fire, and nearly 5 months since they'd moved into the still unfinished house. Those months had tested them with freezing winds that found every crack, with unexpected shortages of supplies, with the challenge of maintaining family routine amidst chaos. Yet those same months had strengthened them, teaching them resilience and patience, deepening the bonds between them as they created order from disorder, comfort from hardship. The new structure stood prouder than the old, larger and sturdier. Mason had designed it himself, with a proper bedroom for the children, a room for him and Anna, and a kitchen twice the size of the original. The main room boasted a stone fireplace that Joseph Blackwell had helped him build, large enough to warm the entire house on the coldest winter nights. Each piece of furniture had a story. The dining table Mason had crafted during December blizzards, the chairs contributed by neighbors, the braided rug Anna had worked on through the long evenings of winter, incorporating scraps from their old life with threads from their new one. Anna wore one of Catherine's old dresses. She'd asked permission first, voice tentative. Mason had said yes, throat tight with unexpected emotion. It looked right on her. Catherine would have approved, he thought. The two women, so different in appearance, Catherine with her golden hair and blue eyes, Anna with her dark blonde braids and clear gray gaze, but similar in spirit. Strong, compassionate, resilient. "Morning," Anna said softly, pouring him coffee in a new mug, blue like his old one, but without the chip. "Morning." He accepted it gratefully, letting the warmth seep into his hands. They didn't need more words than that. 6 months of marriage had taught them to read each other's silences, to communicate in the spaces between words. Sam was already out, feeding the horses. Mason had taught him to saddle them properly, how to check hooves, how to read the weather in their ears. The boy had taken to ranch life with surprising aptitude, soaking up Mason's knowledge like parched earth absorbs rain. At 9, he was still small for his age. The years of poor nutrition had taken their toll. But he was growing stronger daily, his face filling out, his confidence blooming. Lily had a garden patch, tiny seeds planted in careful rows. She checked them every morning, whispering encouragement to the tender shoots. At 6, she was Mason's shadow, following him about the ranch with endless questions and observations. Her fear of loud noises had faded, replaced by a curiosity about everything from how bees made honey to why the sky changed colors at sunset. The ranch was alive with sound. Chickens clucked and scratched in the yard. Horses nickered from the corral. Lily's songs drifted through open windows as she went about her small chores. It was a symphony of life that Mason had never thought to hear again after Catherine and James died. Anna came to stand beside him at the window, slipping her hand into his. They watched as Sam led Chester from the barn, the old Pinto docile under the boy's careful guidance. "He's getting good with the horses," Anna observed, pride evident in her voice. Mason nodded. "Natural talent, gentle hands, good instincts." He squeezed her fingers. "He'll make a fine horseman." They worked together throughout the morning, mending fence line, preparing the vegetable garden for planting, checking on the new calves in the north pasture. There was an easy rhythm to their partnership now, each anticipating the other's needs, moving in tandem like dancers who had memorized the steps. Romance had come slowly, built on trust, like the room was built on foundation. But it had come. Their marriage, begun as a practical solution to the town's interference, had deepened into something neither had expected. A genuine love, rooted in shared experience and mutual respect. Mason found himself laughing more, the weight of his past growing lighter with each passing day. At noon, Sam called out from the corral, "Mason, can we ride to the creek today? You promised to show me the fishing spot." Mason looked at Anna, who nodded her approval. "Sure, son," he called back. The words slipped out naturally. "Son." Sam's face lit up like sunrise, and Mason felt an answering warmth bloom in his chest. He wasn't trying to replace William Whitmore. The man would always be Sam's father by blood. But he hoped to give the boy something William never had, a father's love without condition or cruelty. "Can I come too?" Lily asked, appearing at Mason's side, her small hand slipping into his. "Of course, little one," he said, giving her fingers a gentle squeeze. "We'll make a day of it." As they prepared for their outing, packing fishing gear and a simple lunch, Mason caught Anna watching them, her eyes suspiciously bright. "What is it?" he asked quietly when the children ran to get their jackets. "Just thinking how different things could have been," she said. "If you hadn't opened your door that morning, if Mrs. Harrington had gotten her way." Mason drew her close. "But that's not what happened. This is what happened." He gestured to the home they'd built, the life they'd created from the ashes of their separate past. "This is real." She rested her head against his shoulder. "I know. Sometimes I just need reminding how lucky we are." "Not luck," Mason corrected gently. "Choice. We chose this. Every day, we still do." The creek ran high with spring melt, water burbling over smooth stones, flashing silver in the midday sun. Mason showed Sam how to bait a hook, how to cast the line with a flick of the wrist, how to wait with patience for the fish to bite. Lily wasn't interested in fishing, preferring to collect interesting pebbles along the shore, occasionally calling for Mason or Anna to admire particularly colorful specimens. "Like this?" Sam asked, concentrating fiercely as he cast his line into the deeper pool where trout were likely to hide. "Perfect," Mason affirmed. "Need we wait?" They sat side by side on the bank, the sun warm on their backs. It was peaceful here, the noise of the flowing water masking all other sounds, creating a private world just for them. "Mason," Sam said after a comfortable silence, "can I ask you something?" "Anything." The boy fidgeted with the fishing rod. "At school, the other boys were talking about their fathers, how they're teaching them to hunt and fish and ride." He glanced up, uncertainty in his eyes. "When they asked about my father, I didn't know what to say. William's dead, but you—" He trailed off. Mason chose his words carefully. "What would you like to call me, Sam?" "Could I call you Pom?" The question came out in a rush. Not right away, if you don't want. But someday?" Mason's chest tightened with emotion. "You can call me Pa anytime you want, son. I'd be honored." Sam's smile was like breaking dawn. "Really? Starting now?" "Starting now." "Pa," Sam tested the word. Pa. He nodded decisively. I like how it sounds. Mason had to look away, blinking rapidly to clear the sudden moisture from his eyes. Over by the water's edge, Lily had heard the exchange. She came running over, her skirt pockets bulging with treasured stones. Can I call you Pa too? She asked, climbing into Mason's lap without hesitation. Of course you can, sweetheart. Pa, she said, as if tasting the word. Then with the simple acceptance of childhood, she nodded. I have a new Pa now, a good one. Mason hugged her close, overwhelmed by the trust these children placed in him, a trust he silently vowed never to betray. Anna watched from a few feet away, her eyes shining. Later, as they rode home, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the grassland, Mason felt a profound sense of rightness. This was his family now, a family formed not by blood but by choice and love, and the simple miracle of finding each other when they most needed to be found. The familiar routine of their days had taken on a comforting predictability. Each evening after supper, weather permitting, they would gather on the porch, Mason whittling, Anna mending, the children playing or reading nearby. But Tuesdays were special. Bath night. This particular Tuesday, Mason hauled the last bucket of heated water to the kitchen, where the large copper tub sat before the stove. Anna added rosemary sprigs to the steaming water, a luxury she allowed herself, growing the herbs specifically for this purpose. Ladies first, Mason announced, the traditional signal for Anna and Lily to take their baths while he and Sam finished evening chores. Later, when the men of the house returned, it was their turn. Mason helped Sam wash his hair, noting how the boy was shooting up, almost too tall for the tub now. Soon you'll need to bend your knees like me, Mason joked, demonstrating his own cramped position when it was his turn. Sam laughed, water dripping from his hair. Or we could build a bigger tub. Always building something, aren't we? Mason ruffled the boy's wet hair. After baths, with everyone clean and dressed in nightclothes, they gathered by the fire. This was when Anna would read aloud, currently a chapter each evening from the Swiss Family Robinson. The tale of the shipwrecked family building a life in the wilderness resonated with them all. Tonight, though, Sam had a request. Pa, tell us about when you were a boy. Mason hesitated. He rarely spoke of his childhood. Please, Lily added, her eyes wide and pleading. Well, Mason began slowly, when I was about Sam's age, my father taught me to track deer. The memory surfaced, unexpectedly vivid. He showed me how to read the forest, broken twigs, disturbed leaves, the slight impression of a hoof in soft earth. The children leaned forward, captivated. One winter morning, we followed tracks through fresh snow for miles. Finally, we came upon a buck, magnificent, with antlers like a crown. My father raised his rifle, then lowered it again. Mason smiled at the recollection. He said some creatures were too majestic to hunt, that sometimes tracking was about witnessing, not taking. Anna's hand found his in the firelight. It was the first time he'd shared that story with anyone since Catherine. That night, after the children were asleep, Mason and Anna sat on the porch enjoying the cool night air. The stars spread above them in a dazzling canopy, the Milky Way a bright swath across the velvet darkness. They called me Pa today, Mason said, still marveling at the fact. Anna leaned against him. I heard. How did it feel? Terrifying, wonderful. He searched for the right words. Like being given something precious and fragile. Something I could break if I'm not careful. You won't break it, Anna said with certainty. You're a good father, Frederick. You always have been, even before they called you Pa. He looked at her, surprised. How do you mean? You've been fathering them since that first day, teaching Sam to hammer nails, encouraging Lily to sing, showing them both that adults can be trusted not to hurt them. She took his hand. That's what being a father is. The name just makes it official. Mason considered this. I never thought I'd have the chance, he admitted. After James died, before he took his first breath, I thought that door was closed forever. Life has a way of opening unexpected doors, Anna said softly. Look at us. A year ago, who could have imagined this? They sat in companionable silence, listening to the night sounds, the distant call of a coyote, the rustle of wind in the new leaves, and from the children's room, the soft, reassuring sound of snoring. Mason smiled in the darkness. The room, he murmured. Hmm? I said I'd build a room if they snored. I never imagined it would lead to all this. Anna's laugh was soft, musical. A home, a family, a life. The summons came 3 weeks later, delivered by Timothy from the feed store, an official-looking envelope bearing the seal of the territorial court. Man in a fancy suit brought it to town, Timothy explained, shifting uncomfortably on the porch. Asked me to deliver it personal-like. Mason thanked him, waiting until the young man had ridden away before breaking the seal. Anna appeared at his side, face tense with concern. What is it? Mason scanned the document, his expression growing grave. It's from William's brother, Thomas Whitmore. He's petitioning for custody of Sam and Lily. Anna's face drained of color. What? How? He never even... Her voice faltered. He never once came to see them. Not when William was alive, not after he died. Mason read further. He claims he only recently learned of William's death. Says as bloodkin, he has priority over... He hesitated. Over a stranger who has insinuated himself into the family through questionable circumstances. That's absurd. Anna's hands trembled as she took the document. Thomas knows nothing about the children, has no interest in them except... Her eyes widened as she read a particular passage. Except the inheritance. What inheritance? William's father left a trust for any grandchildren. It passes to them when they come of age. Anna's voice was hollow. I'd forgotten all about it. It wasn't accessible while William was alive, and after he died, I was just trying to survive. Mason paced the porch, mind racing. How much? Enough to make a greedy man interested in 2 children he's never met. Anna sank into a chair, the paper crumpling in her grip. Frederick, he can't take them. He can't. Mason knelt before her, taking her hands in his. He won't. I promise you, Anna. I won't let it happen. The hearing is in 3 weeks, she said, voice steadying with determination. In Helena. Then we'll be in Helena in 3 weeks. Mason stood, his decision made. I'll ride into Silver Creek tomorrow, talk to Judge Wilson, get his advice. That night, neither of them slept well. Mason lay awake, listening to Anna's uneven breathing beside him, knowing she too was staring into the darkness, mind filled with fears neither wished to voice. What would they tell the children? How could they explain that the life they'd carefully built might be torn apart by a man none of them had ever met? A man whose only connection to Sam and Lily was the blood they shared with a father who had brought them more pain than love. Dawn found Mason already dressed, preparing the wagon for the journey to Silver Creek. Anna joined him, her face showing the strain of a sleepless night, but her movements decisive as she packed provisions. We'll tell them after we speak with Judge Wilson, she said. No need to frighten them until we know what we're facing. Mason nodded, grateful for her practical approach. Together, they would face this threat as they had faced the others, with determination, courage, and unwavering love for the children who had become the center of their world. Judge Wilson listened gravely as Mason explained the situation. The official summons spread on the desk between them. Blood relations do have certain legal advantages, the judge admitted, removing his spectacles to polish them with a handkerchief. But not absolute ones, especially in a case like this. What can we do? Anna asked. Fight, the judge said simply. Gather evidence, testimonials from those who know you and the children. Show that they are thriving in your care, that removing them would cause harm. He replaced his spectacles, peering over them at Mason. And I would suggest you engage a proper attorney for the hearing. Who would you recommend? Mason asked. Elijah Montgomery in Helena. He specializes in family matters, has a solid reputation. The judge scribbled a name and address on a piece of paper. Tell him I sent you. As they prepared to leave, Judge Wilson added, one more thing. It would strengthen your case considerably if the adoption were formalized. Have you considered that? Mason and Anna exchanged glances. We discussed it, Mason said, but weren't sure of the process. I can help with that, the judge offered. The papers could be prepared before the hearing. It wouldn't guarantee victory, but it would demonstrate your commitment to the children's welfare. They thanked him, stepping out into the bright spring sunshine with a plan beginning to form. Their next stop was the church, where Reverend Phillips welcomed them with concern. Of course I'll provide a testimonial, he assured them after hearing their plight, and I believe many in the congregation would do the same. The children have become beloved members of our community. Their last stop was Mrs. Harrington's store. Mason hesitated at the doorway, remembering their last unpleasant exchange. "Let me," Anna whispered, squeezing his arm before entering alone. Through the window, Mason watched Anna approach the counter, where Mrs. Harrington was meticulously arranging tins. Their conversation appeared tense at first, with the older woman's posture rigid and unwelcoming. After several minutes, Anna motioned for Mason to join them. As he entered, he noticed something unexpected: a small framed photograph on the counter that hadn't been there before. It showed a young man in miner's clothes, his smile eerily similar to Mrs. Harrington's rare one. "My Robert," Mrs. Harrington said, following Mason's gaze. "He was 22 when the Silverton mine collapsed." "I'm sorry," Mason said quietly. "I blamed you for years," she admitted, her fingers tracing the frame's edge. "Needed someone to blame, I suppose. But Reverend Phillips showed me the mine company's records last month. Reports you filed warning about the unsafe conditions. Reports they ignored." She looked up, her eyes hard but not unkind. "Should have been the owners in those papers, not you." She rearranged a display of canned peaches with mechanical precision. "Been watching those children at church. The boy, Sam, he plays with Jimmy Wilson now. Couldn't even look another child in the eye when you first brought him." Her hands paused. "And the girl sings in the children's choir, clear as a bell." "I may have had my doubts," she continued, "but I'm not blind. Those children are flourishing with you. Any fool can see that." She fixed Mason with a stern look. "Don't mistake me, Mr. Mason. I still think the situation was handled improperly. The marriage should have come sooner, but taking children from a loving home is not something I could support." Mason blinked at her use of his real name. "Yes, I know who you are," she said matter-of-factly. "Always did, truth be told." "Thank you, Mrs. Harrington," Anna said sincerely. "Your support means a great deal." The older woman's expression softened slightly. "When they took Robert out, he was still warm. Sometimes I imagine he might have lived if they'd reached him sooner." She straightened a jar with unnecessary precision. "No parent should lose a child, through death or the courts." She turned back to her shelves. "I'll write your testimonial this evening. Make sure that San Francisco dandy understands what he's trying to break apart." By the time they returned home, they had collected promises of a dozen testimonials and made arrangements to meet with Elijah Montgomery and Helena the following week. The adoption papers would be ready for signing before the custody hearing. They found Sam and Lily in the barn with Joseph Blackwell, who had come to check on the new foalborn just days earlier. The children were wrapped as Joseph explained the proper care for a newborn horse, their faces alight with the simple joy of new life. "How do we tell them?" Anna whispered as they watched from the doorway. "Honestly," Mason replied, "but not yet. Let them have this moment." That evening, after Joseph had gone, they gathered the children in the main room. Sam, sensing the seriousness in their manner, sat up straight, his expression wary. Lily, less perceptive of adult concerns, nestled against Anna's side, playing with a small wooden horse Mason had carved for her. "We need to talk to you about something important," Mason began, choosing his words with care. "In a few weeks, we're going to Helena for a special court hearing." "What's a court hearing?" Sam asked. "It's a meeting where a judge listens to different people and makes a decision about something," Anna explained. "What decision?" Sam's eyes narrowed with the perception that had developed during his difficult early years. Mason and Anna exchanged glances. There was no easy way to say it. "Your Uncle Thomas, your father's brother, has asked the court to let you and Lily live with him," Mason said gently. Lily looked up, suddenly alert. "Leave here? Leave you and Ma?" "That's what he's asking," Anna confirmed, stroking her daughter's hair. "But we're going to fight it. We don't want you to go, and we're doing everything we can to make sure you stay right here with us." Sam's face had gone pale. "I don't want to live with Uncle Thomas. I don't even know him." "Pa," Lily's voice wavered, "you promised. You promised we could stay forever." Mason gathered her into his arms. "And I mean to keep that promise, little one. This is your home, and we are your family. Nothing and no one is going to change that." "But what if the judge says we have to go?" and Sam persisted, always the practical one, always preparing for the worst. Mason met the boy's gaze directly. "Then we'll appeal the decision. And if necessary, we'll fight that ruling too. We will never stop fighting for you, Sam, never. Sam studied Mason's face, searching for truth or doubt. Finally, he nodded, apparently satisfied by what he saw. We'll fight too, he said with quiet determination. Later, when the children were asleep, Mason found Anna on the porch, staring out at the star-filled sky. They took it better than I expected, she said as he joined her. Sam didn't, Mason countered. He's terrified. He's just learned to hide it. Anna sighed. You're right. After William, well, Sam became very good at concealing his feelings. We'll need to watch him closely in the coming weeks. Make sure he knows it's safe to be afraid, to be angry. And Lily? She trusts us to fix this, Mason said. That's its own kind of burden. Anna leaned against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. We will fix it, she said with fierce conviction. Those children are ours, Frederick, in every way that matters. Yes, he agreed, arm tightening around her shoulders. They are. Helena sprawled before them, larger and busier than any of them had anticipated. The children gazed wide-eyed at the bustling streets, the ornate government buildings, the variety of people hurrying about their business. After the quiet isolation of the ranch and the modest size of Silver Creek, the territorial capital seemed overwhelming. They found lodging at a small hotel recommended by Judge Wilson, clean, respectable, and within their means. Their meeting with Elijah Montgomery was scheduled for the following morning, with the custody hearing set for 3 days later. The attorney's office was located in a handsome brick building near the courthouse. Montgomery himself was younger than Mason had expected, perhaps 40, with keen blue eyes and a reassuring manner that put even the children at ease. Judge Wilson has briefed me on your situation, he said after introductions were complete. I've already begun preparing our case. For the next 2 hours, he questioned them thoroughly about their life together, how the children had come into their care, their progress over the months, the community they had built around them. He examined the testimonials they had brought and nodded with approval at the adoption papers Judge Wilson had prepared. These will help significantly, he said, as will the children's own statements, if they're willing to speak. Sam straightened in his chair. I'll speak, he said firmly. I want to stay with Ma and Pa. Me too, Lily added, though her voice was smaller, less certain. Montgomery smiled at them. Good. The judge will want to hear from you both. He turned to Mason and Anna. I should warn you, Thomas Whitmore has engaged counsel as well. Harlan Prescott, a rather formidable opponent. What are our chances? Mason asked bluntly. Montgomery considered his answer. Reasonable, I'd say. The fact that Mr. Whitmore has never sought contact with the children until now, coupled with the clear bond you've established and the community support you've garnered. These are strong points in your favor. He tapped his pen against the desk. However, blood relations still carry significant weight in the courts. So it could go either way, Anna said, her voice steady despite the fear Mason knew she must be feeling. Yes, Montgomery admitted, it could, but I promise you, we will present the strongest case possible. As they left the attorney's office, Mason felt a mixture of hope and dread. They had done everything they could to prepare, but so much remained outside their control. The thought of returning to the ranch without the children was unimaginable, a wound that would never heal. Can we see the Capitol building? Sam asked as they walked back toward their hotel, his interest in their surroundings momentarily overriding his anxiety. Mason glanced at Anna, who nodded. Why not? We've time before dinner. They spent the afternoon exploring the city, trying to give the children a sense of adventure rather than apprehension. Lily's hand rarely left Mason's, her fingers curled tightly around his, as if anchoring herself to him. Sam walked close to Anna's side, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings, alert to any potential threat. That evening, in their hotel room, Mason read to the children from a book of adventure tales he'd brought from home. It was their nightly ritual, one they had maintained even here, a reminder of normalcy amidst uncertainty. When the children were finally asleep, Mason and Anna spoke in low voices by the window, planning their strategy for the days ahead. Anna would take the children shopping for new clothes tomorrow. They should look their best for the hearing. Mason would meet again with Montgomery to review final details of their case. What if we lose? Anna whispered, giving voice to the fear they had both been avoiding. Mason took her hands in his. Then we'll appeal, just as I told Sam. And if that fails, we'll find another way. I swore I'd build walls high enough that gossip couldn't climb them. I'll build them high enough to keep out the law too if I must. You mean run? Anna's eyes widened. Leave everything behind? If it comes to that, Mason said grimly, though I pray it won't. Anna was quiet for a long moment. I'd do it, she said finally. For them, I'd leave everything. Start over somewhere new. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, Mason said, drawing her close. But it's good to know we agree. They held each other in the darkness, each lost in private thoughts, finding comfort in the simple fact of the other's presence. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The day of the hearing dawned clear and warm. They dressed carefully, the children in their new clothes, Anna in her best dress, Mason in the suit he had worn for their wedding. Breakfast was a quiet affair, none of them having much appetite despite Montgomery's insistence that they eat to keep up their strength. The courthouse was imposing, its stone facade and broad steps designed to inspire respect for the law it housed. Inside, the polished wood and hushed atmosphere added to the sense of gravity. They found Montgomery waiting in the corridor outside the assigned courtroom. "You're here early. Good," he said, ushering them to a nearby bench. "Thomas Whitmore arrived yesterday. He's already inside with Prescott." Mason felt Anna tense beside him. "What does he look like?" she asked. "I never met him. William always said they weren't close. Tall, well-dressed, resembles the children somewhat around the eyes." Montgomery straightened his papers. "He seems confident." "Of course he does," Mason muttered. "He has no idea what he's trying to take from us." "Stay calm," Montgomery advised. "The judge will observe your demeanor closely. Show dignity, restraint, and above all, your love for these children." The courtroom doors opened, and a clerk called their case. Montgomery led the way, guiding them to a table on the right side of the room. Across the aisle sat a man who could only be Thomas Whitmore, elegantly attired, with fair hair and the same piercing blue eyes as Lily. Beside him, an older man with silver hair and an imperious expression. Harlan Prescott, presumably. Thomas's gaze locked with Anna's, then shifted to the children. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of Sam, who stared back with undisguised hostility. "All rise," the clerk announced as Judge Harmon entered, a portly man with a stern countenance and bushy side whiskers. Everyone stood until he was seated at the bench. "Be seated," he instructed, adjusting his spectacles as he reviewed the documents before him. "This is a hearing regarding the custody of Samuel and Lily Whitmore, minor children. I understand Mr. Thomas Whitmore, brother of the deceased father, is petitioning for custody." He peered over his glasses. "Is that correct, Mr. Prescott?" "It is, Your Honor." Prescott rose, his voice resonant in the quiet room. "My client, as the children's closest blood relative, seeks to provide them with the advantages his position and resources afford. And opposing this petition are," the judge consulted his papers, "Mr. Frederick Mason and Mrs. Anna Mason, formerly Whitmore, the children's mother and stepfather." "That is correct, Your Honor," Montgomery confirmed, standing. "My clients have been raising these children since Mrs. Mason was widowed. They have recently formalized their relationship through marriage and are in the process of adopting the children with Mrs. Mason's full consent." Judge Harmon nodded. "I see. Well, let's proceed. Mr. Prescott, please present your case." Prescott approached the bench with confident strides. "Your Honor, my client, Mr. Thomas Whitmore, is a successful businessman with the means to provide these children with every advantage. The finest education, cultural opportunities, social connections that will serve them well into adulthood. As their uncle, he has both the legal right and the moral obligation to ensure they receive these benefits." He paced before the bench, warming to his argument. "While Mrs. Mason's maternal rights are not in question, the environment in which she has placed these children is. A remote ranch, limited educational opportunities, association with persons of questionable character." His gaze flicked dismissively toward Mason. "Mr. Whitmore only recently learned of his brother's passing, having been abroad on business. Upon his return and discovery of the children's circumstances, he immediately sought to fulfill his familial duty." Prescott's tone suggested this was the most natural thing in the world. "He has prepared a home for them in San Francisco, enrolled them in the finest schools, and stands ready to ensure their future prosperity." Throughout this presentation, Mason felt Anna's hand tighten on his, her knuckles white with tension. The children sat still as statues, though Lily's lower lip trembled dangerously. Furthermore, Prescott continued, there is the matter of the children's inheritance, a trust established by their grandfather, which Mr. Whitmore is prepared to manage until they come of age. This substantial sum requires proper oversight to ensure it benefits the children as intended. Are you suggesting Mrs. Mason is incapable of managing her children's financial affairs? The judge interrupted. Not incapable, Your Honor, merely inexperienced. And given her husband's background, a man who changed his name and concealed his identity for years, there are legitimate concerns about undue influence. Mason felt a surge of anger at the insinuation, but Montgomery's warning kept him silent. Beside him, Sam's face had flushed red with indignation. Thank you, Mr. Prescott, Judge Harmon said when the lawyer had finished. Mr. Montgomery, your response. Montgomery rose with deliberate calm. Your Honor, my clients do not dispute Mr. Whitmore's financial advantages or his blood relationship to these children. What we question is his motivation and his understanding of what truly constitutes their best interests. He walked to stand behind Sam and Lily, resting a gentle hand on each of their shoulders. These children have endured significant trauma, the loss of their father, financial hardship, displacement from their home. Throughout these challenges, their mother has been their constant support. Mr. Mason has provided not only material necessities, but emotional stability and paternal guidance. Montgomery approached the bench, his expression earnest. Your Honor, we have numerous testimonials from community members, teachers, clergy, neighbors, all attesting to the children's well-being and the loving home my clients have created. He handed a folder to the judge. These include statements from Judge Wilson of Silver Creek, who has personally observed the family, and Reverend Phillips, who has witnessed their integration into the community. The judge leafed through the papers, his expression inscrutable. Montgomery continued, as for Mr. Mason's past, it is no secret. He was a mine foreman who survived a tragic disaster. Unjustly blamed by the mining company, he changed his name to escape persecution, not prosecution. His character is beyond reproach, as these testimonials affirm. Montgomery turned to face Thomas Whitmore directly. We would ask the court to consider why Mr. Whitmore, who by his own admission had little contact with his brother during life, suddenly developed an interest in his niece and nephew only after learning of their inheritance, and why, if his concern is genuine, he did not first approach Mrs. Mason to discuss the children's welfare before initiating legal proceedings. Thomas Whitmore shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Prescott whispered something in his ear, and he straightened, his expression hardening. Finally, Your Honor, Montgomery concluded, we would ask that the children themselves be heard. At 9 and 6, they are old enough to express their preferences. Their voices should be considered in any decision affecting their future. Judge Harmon nodded thoughtfully. I agree, Mr. Montgomery. I would like to speak with the children in my chambers. He glanced at the court reporter, off the record, to allow them to speak freely. Sam stood immediately, shoulders squared with determination. Lily hesitated, looking to Mason and Anna for reassurance. It's all right, sweetheart, Anna murmured. Just tell the judge the truth about how you feel. Lily nodded solemnly and then followed Sam and the judge out of the courtroom. The door closed behind them with a soft click that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. What now? Anna whispered to Montgomery. Now we wait, he replied, and trust that the children can articulate what's in their hearts. The minutes stretched interminably. Mason found himself studying Thomas Whitmore, searching for resemblances to William, for any indication of the man's true character. There was something calculating in his expression, a coldness that reminded Mason uncomfortably of certain mine owners he had known, men who valued profit above human life. At last, the chamber door opened. Judge Harmon emerged first, followed by the children. Lily ran straight to Anna, climbing into her lap. Sam walked more sedately, but the slight tremor in his hands betrayed his emotion. I have heard from both parties, the judge announced, resuming his seat, and I have listened carefully to Samuel and Lily. Before rendering my decision, I will hear final statements. Mr. Whitmore, would you care to address the court directly? Thomas Whitmore rose, adjusting his waistcoat with manicured fingers. Your Honor, I come before you with only the best intentions for my brother's children. While I respect Mrs. Mason's maternal affection, I believe I can offer advantages she and her husband simply cannot. These children deserve every opportunity life can provide. I can give them that: the finest education, cultural refinement, social connections, a future of prosperity and achievement. He hesitated, then added, "As for the timing of my petition, I can only say that business obligations kept me abroad longer than anticipated. Upon my return and learning of William's death, I acted as swiftly as possible to fulfill my familial duty." "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore," the judge said. "Mr. Mason, would you like to speak?" Mason stood, acutely aware of every eye upon him. Public speaking had never been his strength, but for Sam and Lily he would find the words. "Your Honor," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "I'm not a wealthy man. I can't offer fancy schools or social connections. What I can offer is a home built with my own hands, land that will pass to these children when they're grown, skills that will serve them throughout life." He looked at Sam and Lily, drawing strength from their trusting faces. "But more important than any material thing, I can offer love, not because they're my blood, but because I've chosen them, and they've chosen me." Mason turned back to the judge. "These children have known hardship, sir. They've known fear. With us, they've begun to heal, to trust, to feel secure. Uprooting them now, sending them to a strange city with a man they have never met, it would do irreparable harm." His voice grew stronger, more certain. "A home isn't built of fine furnishings or social advantages. It's built of morning rituals and bedtime stories, of inside jokes and shared memories, of knowing you're safe and loved, no matter what." Mason met Thomas Whitmore's gaze directly. "If Mr. Whitmore truly cares for these children's welfare, I invite him to be part of their lives. As an uncle who visits, who sends birthday gifts, who takes an interest in their growth. But their home is with us. Their life is with us." He sat down, suddenly drained. Anna's hand found his, squeezing tightly. Judge Harmon removed his spectacles, pinching the bridge of his nose thoughtfully. "This court's responsibility is to determine what arrangement best serves the interests of these children. I have considered the legal precedents, the material circumstances, the community support, and most importantly, the children's own wishes." The courtroom was utterly silent, every person holding their breath. "Mr. Whitmore, your financial resources and blood relationship are significant factors. However, they are outweighed by the stable, loving environment Mr. and Mrs. Mason have provided, as evidenced by numerous testimonials and the children's own statements." Mason felt a surge of hope. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "I find the timing of your petition troubling, particularly in light of the inheritance you mentioned. Had you demonstrated ongoing interest in these children's welfare prior to this legal action, my ruling might be different." Thomas Whitmore's face darkened with anger, but Prescott placed a restraining hand on his arm. "It is the finding of this court that Samuel and Lily Whitmore shall remain in the custody of their mother, Anna Mason, and her husband, Frederick Mason. The adoption proceedings may continue as planned." Judge Harmon fixed Thomas with a stern look. "Mr. Whitmore, you are granted visitation rights to be arranged at the Masons' convenience. This court encourages you to develop a relationship with your niece and nephew that is genuinely focused on their well-being." He struck his gavel once, the sound sharp and final. "This hearing is adjourned." For a moment, Mason couldn't move, couldn't speak. Then Lily launched herself into his arms, and Sam was hugging Anna, and they were all crying and laughing at once. "We won," Anna asked Montgomery, as if unable to believe it. "We won," he confirmed, smiling broadly. "Congratulations." Across the aisle, Thomas Whitmore stood abruptly, his face a mask of thwarted ambition. Without a word to anyone, he strode from the courtroom, Prescott hurrying after him. "Will he appeal?" Mason asked Montgomery quietly over the children's heads. "He could try," the attorney said. "But given the judge's reasoning, I doubt he'd succeed. I suspect once his anger cools, he'll recognize that his best course is to establish the relationship the judge suggested, on your terms." Outside the courthouse, standing in the warm spring sunshine, Mason gathered his family close. "Let's go home," he said simply. And home they went, to the ranch where wildflowers bloomed in Lily's garden, where Sam's horses waited in the corral, where the room Mason had built had become the foundation for so much more. home to the life they had chosen, together. 5 years passed. The ranch prospered, expanding to include a small orchard and additional grazing land. The children grew, Sam tall and lanky at 14, showing promise as a horseman and carpenter. Lily at 11, bright and curious, her garden experiments becoming increasingly sophisticated. Thomas Whitmore had indeed established a relationship with his niece and nephew, though on the Masons' terms. He visited twice a year, bringing gifts from his travels and stories of San Francisco. Whatever his initial motivations, he seemed to have developed genuine affection for the children, and they for him. On a warm June evening, the family gathered on the porch after dinner. Mason rocked gently in the chair Joseph Blackwell had crafted as a wedding gift, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. Anna sat beside him, mending one of Sam's perpetually torn shirts. The children sprawled on the porch steps, Lily reading aloud from a book of poetry, while Sam whittled a small figure from pine. "Pa," Lily said, looking up from her book. "Why do you smile when we snore?" Mason chuckled. "Where did that question come from?" "I was just wondering. Sam says you always smile when you check on us at night." Mason glanced at Sam, who shrugged, slightly embarrassed at being caught in an observation. "Because it means you're here," Mason answered honestly. "Means I'm not alone anymore." Anna joined them on the steps, slipping her hand into his. "None of us are alone anymore." As darkness fell, they remained together on the porch, watching stars emerge in the vast Montana sky. Mason thought back to that cold morning when he'd found 3 strangers huddled on these very boards. How close he had come to sending them away, to preserving his solitude and his grief. "What are you thinking about?" Anna asked, noting his contemplative silence. Mason considered the journey that had brought them here, from strangers on a porch to a family forged through choice and challenge. "I'm thinking about beginnings," he said, his voice soft with wonder. "How sometimes they don't announce themselves. They just slip in quietly, disguised as ordinary days." Anna's fingers laced with his, warm and familiar. "Like a cold morning and unexpected guests? Like a half-serious promise about a room," he agreed. Inside, the clock chimed 9, marking another day complete. Later, after the children had gone to bed, Mason paused in their doorway as he did each night. The carved names on the frame caught the lamplight. Sam and Lily, 18, Frederick and Anna, 1878, and below the words that held their shared truth: "This is home, always." The soft cadence of Sam's breathing filled the darkness. No longer a stranger's sound, but the familiar rhythm of his son's sleep. Mason gently closed the door halfway and returned to Anna, to their room, to the life that had found him when he'd stopped looking. Outside, the Montana night spread vast and endless, a canopy of stars above the home they'd built together. Not just of timber and nails, but of second chances and chosen love.